Two experienced teenage hikers vanished from the rugged Colorado backcountry, promising their anxious parents they'd be safe. For 5 years, the only clue was their deserted campsite, a place so strangely untouched it only deepened the mystery of their disappearance. Then, a hunter's remarkable find, a weathered bone with a rusted piece of metal embedded in it, would finally expose the horrifying reason the girls never came home. The satellite messenger was supposed to be the compromise. This rugged piece of technology was designed to track movement and, in an emergency, summon help to the most remote corners of the globe. For Lena Petrovich, it was the only reason she could sleep at all while her 19-year-old daughter, Iris Jansen, and Iris's best friend, Quinn Walsh, embarked on a 3-day backpacking trip into the heart of the Colorado mountains. It was Thursday morning, August 16, 2012. The girls had been due back the previous evening. Lena had expected a call around 8 p.m., the usual cheerful rundown of the trip's highlights. But 8 p.m. came and went. By 10 p.m., a tight knot of worry began to form in her chest. By midnight, she was pacing the floor, repeatedly calling both girls' cell phones, only to be met with the sterile response of their voicemails, a clear indication that the phones were either off or far outside the range of any tower. This wasn't entirely unexpected. The area was known for its spotty reception. But they were supposed to be out of the wilderness by now, back at their car, driving home. By Thursday morning, the worry had curdled into genuine fear. Lena contacted Quinn's parents, who were experiencing the same escalating panic. The consensus was immediate: something was wrong. Trembling slightly, Lena logged into the account associated with the satellite messenger. The girls had initially resisted taking it. At 19, they felt invincible, experienced hikers who had navigated these mountains numerous times before. They argued it was just unnecessary surveillance, but both sets of parents had been adamant. The device was non-negotiable. Reluctantly, Iris and Quinn had clipped it to one of their packs. The tracking interface loaded, displaying a topographical map of the region. Lena's eyes immediately sought out the latest ping, the digital breadcrumb that would show their progress. But the location hadn't updated. The map displayed a single cluster of coordinates marking the location of their first night's campsite, Monday, August 13th. The timestamp showed the device had last transmitted from that spot over 48 hours ago. Since Tuesday morning, there had been nothing, no movement, no manual check-ins, and most critically, no SOS signal. The stillness of that digital marker felt ominous. It suggested that the device, and perhaps the girls themselves, had stopped moving long before they were due home. Official missing person reports were filed with the county sheriff's office. The names Iris Jansen and Quinn Walsh entered the system. To those who knew them, they were vibrant and inseparable. Iris, with her playful energy, and Quinn, the more grounded of the two, always prepared and always smiling. They were seasoned outdoors enthusiasts, deeply respectful of the wilderness, but driven by a shared passion for adventure. This particular trip had caused some hesitation among their parents. The route they'd chosen was more remote and challenging than their usual haunts, but they were legally adults, and their preparation had been meticulous. They had the gear, the experience, and the satellite messenger. As search and rescue, SAR, teams began to mobilize, investigators started building a timeline of their last known movements. Lena Petrovich provided authorities with recent photographs of the girls, desperate to give the searchers clear images to work with. One photo, in particular, stood out. It captured the girls at a stunning mountain overlook, a vast expanse of forested valleys and a turquoise alpine lake stretching out behind them. Quinn, wearing a neon lime green top and matching baseball cap, had her arm thrown high in the air, her smile wide and joyous. Iris, in a bright pink top and a backwards dark blue cap, was sticking her tongue out playfully, her arm wrapped tightly around Quinn's waist. They radiated happiness, the picture of carefree adventure. Lena confirmed she had taken that photograph just 5 days prior, on Saturday, August 11th. She had accompanied them on a preparatory day hike in the region, a final outing together before their solo expedition. As the SAR helicopters began thumping their way toward the last known coordinates, that image of unbridled joy was a stark contrast to the dread settling over the mountains. The coordinates provided by the satellite messenger led search and rescue teams deep into a designated wilderness area. This wasn't a casual day hike location. It was rugged, demanding terrain characterized by steep ascents, dense pine forests, and scree slopes that could shift treacherously underfoot. The air was thinner here, and the weather notoriously unpredictable. For the SAR teams, The hike into the last known location was a grueling effort undertaken with a heavy sense of urgency. They knew that in the wilderness, time was the enemy. Upon reaching the location late on Thursday afternoon, the teams found exactly what the digital marker had indicated, a campsite. But the scene they encountered didn't provide the clear answers they had hoped for. Instead, it deepened the mystery in a profoundly unsettling way. It was a small, established clearing near a creek, the kind of spot experienced backpackers would choose. The girls' two-person tent was set up correctly, zipped closed. There was a cold fire pit, indicating a fire hadn't been lit for at least a day, maybe longer. And scattered around the immediate vicinity there was gear, nearly all of it. The two distinctive royal blue backpacks, the same ones seen in the photograph Lena had provided, were leaning against a log, packed and ready for travel. Inside the tent, investigators found sleeping bags rolled up, clothing neatly stored, and the remainder of their food supplies untouched. Water filtration systems, first aid kits, headlamps, all the essentials for wilderness survival, were present and accounted for. And sitting prominently on a flat stone near the fire pit was the satellite messenger. It was powered on, the small indicator light blinking rhythmically, but it hadn't been moved. The scene was baffling because of its normalcy. There were no signs of a struggle. The ground was undisturbed, showing no indication of a confrontation or a hasty retreat. There was no blood, no torn clothing, no evidence of an animal attack. The campsite was clean, with food properly stored in bare canisters, indicating the girls had followed wilderness protocols. It looked, for all intents and purposes, as though Iris and Quinn had simply stood up and walked away from their campsite, leaving everything behind. This scenario immediately paralyzed the investigation with a single agonizing question. Why? Why would two experienced, intelligent hikers who understood the risks of the wilderness abandon their camp without any supplies? Why leave behind their food, their water filters, and most critically, their only lifeline to the outside world? It contradicted everything known about their training and their personalities. The discovery of the abandoned camp triggered a massive escalation of the search effort. The initial teams were rapidly supplemented by ground crews, canine units, and air support. The scale of the operation was immense, covering miles of incredibly difficult terrain radiating outward from the campsite. The helicopters flew low, scanning the slopes and valleys, while ground crews meticulously combed through the dense underbrush. Lena Petrovich, along with Quinn's parents, maintained a constant vigil at the SAR command center established at the trailhead. The atmosphere was tense, a mixture of focused professionalism and profound empathy. Lena, in particular, was relentless, pushing the incident commanders for updates, suggesting areas they might have gone, desperate to contribute anything that might help find her daughter. Back at the campsite, forensic investigators began the painstaking process of examining the items left behind, hoping to find some clue, however small, that might explain the girl's disappearance. They cataloged every item with meticulous care, but the physical evidence yielded nothing immediate. However, among the personal items found inside the tent, one object stood out as unusual, not because it was incriminating, but because it offered a potential insight into their intentions. It was a specialized regional guide book on alpine flora, a detailed reference for identifying rare plants found in the high country. This wasn't a standard hiking guide, it was specific and academic. Inside the guidebook, several pages had been carefully marked with small adhesive tabs. These pages detailed specific species of rare wildflowers that were known to bloom only for a short period in late summer and only at higher elevations near the campsite. This discovery offered the first tangible theory. It suggested that perhaps Iris and Quinn had intended a short hike or foraging trip close to the camp. If they were planning to ascend a nearby ridge to look for these specific flowers, it might explain why they hadn't taken their heavy backpacks. They might have assumed it would be a quick trip, perhaps just an hour or two. This theory accounted for the abandoned gear, but it didn't explain why they never returned. A short hike shouldn't have ended in disaster. Even if they had become lost or injured, they were close enough to the camp that they should have been found quickly. The search continued for days, stretching into weeks. The focus remained on the areas highlighted in the guidebook, the higher elevations and ridges surrounding the campsite. But the terrain was treacherous, and the searchers found nothing. No dropped water bottle, no piece of clothing snagged on a branch, no footprints leaving the immediate vicinity of the camp. It was as if the mountain itself had erased every trace of their presence. As the investigation dragged on, the pressure mounted. Tips and sightings began to flood in. One report in particular seemed promising and caused a significant diversion of resources. A supply store owner in a small town about 30 miles away from the trailhead contacted authorities, claiming he had seen two young women matching Iris and Quinn's description on the afternoon of Tuesday, August 14th, the day they likely vanished from the campsite. He reported that the women seemed distressed and were seen arguing near a rusted older model pickup truck. This lead was taken seriously. It suggested the possibility that the girls had made it out of the wilderness and encountered someone dangerous. Investigators spent precious time tracking down the store owner, reviewing security footage, and attempting to identify the pickup truck. Lena and the Walsh family waited in agonizing suspense. But after a thorough investigation, the lead disintegrated. The women seen arguing were eventually identified as unrelated hikers who had been traveling through the area at the same time. It was a dead end, a frustrating detour that cost the investigation valuable time. By mid-September, the weather in the high country began to turn. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and the threat of early snowstorms loomed. The massive search operation, which had involved hundreds of personnel, was reluctantly scaled down. The active search was called off. The complete absence of any trace of Iris and Quinn left investigators baffled and the families devastated. The wilderness held its secrets tightly. The case of the missing hikers, marked by the eerie stillness of their abandoned campsite, began its slow descent into the archives of the Cold Case Unit. 5 years passed. 5 summers where the snows melted and the wildflowers bloomed. And 5 winters where the high country was locked under a thick blanket of white. The disappearance of Iris Jansen and Quinn Walsh had become a regional ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered among hikers and locals. The initial frenzy of media attention had long since faded, replaced by the quiet, enduring agony of the families left behind. For Lena Petrovich, the passage of time brought no closure. She refused to let the case fade entirely. She organized numerous private searches, hiring specialized teams and experienced trackers to comb through the areas that the official search might have missed. But every effort yielded the same result: nothing. The summer of 2017 arrived. In early September, during the peak of the elk rutting season, Haskell Bauer was tracking a large bull deep in a remote section of the forest. Haskell was an experienced hunter in his late 50s, a local who knew these mountains intimately. He had spent decades tracking game through the dense forests and rugged terrain. This area was far from any established trails, miles away from the original 2012 search grid where Iris and Quinn had vanished. It was characterized by dense old-growth woods, steep ravines, and difficult access, the kind of place where few people ever ventured. Haskell was accompanied by his tracking dog, a well-trained blue-tick coonhound named Duke. They had been hiking for hours, moving slowly and deliberately through the thick underbrush. The air was cool and damp, scented with pine and decaying leaves. As they moved through a particularly dense section of the forest, Duke suddenly broke away from the track they were following. The dog became agitated, whining and sniffing the ground with frantic intensity. Haskell watched him, initially assuming he had caught the scent of a smaller animal. But Duke's behavior was unusual. He wasn't tracking. He was focused on a single spot near the base of an enormous ancient tree that had been overturned, likely by a storm years ago. Its massive root ball was exposed to the elements. Duke began to dig frantically, sending dirt and debris flying. Haskell called him back, but the dog ignored him, consumed by whatever scent he had detected. Haskell moved closer to investigate, assuming the dog had found a burrow. After a few minutes of intense digging, Duke managed to pull something out of the disturbed earth. He turned and trotted back towards Haskell, dropping the object at his feet. Haskell looked down, expecting to see a stick, or perhaps a piece of scavenged animal bone. But what he saw made his blood run cold. It was a bone, yes, but it wasn't from an animal. It was weathered and discolored, stained dark brown by the soil, but its shape was unmistakable. It was a human hip bone, a pelvis. Haskell stood frozen, staring at the object. The silence of the forest suddenly felt oppressive. He had spent his life in these woods, encountering the remains of countless animals, but he had never stumbled upon human remains. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He secured Duke, who was still whining and eager to return to the dig site. Haskell's heart was pounding in his chest. He knew he had to investigate further. He approached the overturned tree cautiously, his hunter's instincts taking over. The ground where Duke had been digging was disturbed, the dark, rich soil contrasting with the surrounding forest floor. He knelt down, using a sturdy stick to carefully clear away more dirt and debris. Almost immediately, he uncovered more bones. They were scattered and incomplete, suggesting they had been buried for a significant period and possibly disturbed by animals. He recognized vertebrae, ribs, and fragments of limb bones. And then he found it. He carefully brushed away a thick layer of compacted soil and pine needles, revealing a segment of a human vertebral column. It consisted of several vertebrae held together by dried ligaments. But it wasn't the bones themselves that made Haskell recoil in horror. Lodged violently between two of the vertebrae was a rusted, crudely made arrowhead. It was a chilling sight. The metal was dark brown and orange from corrosion, but its shape was distinct. A flat triangular head with sharp, defined barbs designed to prevent easy removal. The shaft of the arrow was gone, snapped off, leaving only the menacing head embedded deep within the bone. The implications were immediate and horrifying. This wasn't an accidental death. This was murder. And the weapon was unlike anything Haskell had ever seen used in modern times. Haskell stood up, his mind reeling. He was deep in the wilderness, miles from any cell reception. He knew he had to report this immediately, but he also knew he couldn't just leave the remains exposed. He made a difficult decision. He carefully packaged the spine segment, the undeniable proof of a violent death, wrapping it in a spare jacket and placing it securely in his pack. He then covered the remaining bones with branches and debris, concealing the site as best he could. He marked the location on his GPS unit, taking precise coordinates of the burial site. He knew he needed to get to a place where he could contact the authorities. He began the long hike out of the wilderness, moving with a speed driven by adrenaline and a profound sense of duty. He knew of a remote cabin about 5 miles away, owned by a friend, which had a satellite phone for emergencies. The hike was tense. Haskell felt the weight of the spine segment in his pack, a gruesome burden. He couldn't stop thinking about the arrowhead, its archaic design suggesting a story far stranger and more sinister than he could imagine. After several hours of grueling hiking, he reached the cabin. He retrieved the hidden key and entered. He powered up the satellite phone, waiting impatiently for it to acquire a signal. Before making the call, he took the spine segment out of his pack and placed it on a wooden table. The artificial light of the cabin highlighted the texture of the bone and the corroded metal. He took several photographs of the evidence with his digital camera, ensuring he had a record of the discovery. Then, with a deep breath, he dialed the number for the state police. He explained the situation, his voice strained but steady, providing the images and the precise coordinates of the burial site. He told them about the hip bone, the scattered remains, and the arrowhead embedded in the spine. The authorities on the other end of the line mobilized immediately, assembling a team of investigators and forensic experts. For the first time in 5 years, there was a break in the case. But the nature of the discovery suggested that the answers they were about to uncover would be darker than anyone had imagined. The coordinates provided by Haskell Bauer led investigators into a section of the wilderness that required hours of difficult hiking. The atmosphere among the team was somber and focused. They knew they were hiking into a crime scene, one that had been hidden for years. The remoteness of the location underscored the chilling reality that whoever had buried the remains had intended for them never to be found. Upon arrival, the team immediately secured the area. The scene was exactly as Haskell had described: the overturned ancient tree, the disturbed earth, and the scattered skeletal remains. The investigators began the painstaking process of documenting the scene, photographing every detail before anything was moved. The excavation of the burial site was a meticulous operation. The remains were incomplete and scattered, indicating significant animal activity and environmental exposure over the years. The bones were carefully collected, catalogued, and packaged for transport. The spine segment with the embedded arrowhead, which Haskell had handed over to the first responding officers, was treated with the utmost care, recognized as the centerpiece of the investigation. The remains were transported to the State Forensic Anthropology Lab, where the process of identification began. The initial analysis was challenging. The bones were weathered and degraded, making DNA extraction difficult. There were no surgical implants or distinctive medical devices that could provide a quick identification. The initial attempts at matching the remains to missing person databases failed. The frustration among the investigators was palpable. They had found human remains, undeniable proof of a murder, but they couldn't identify the victim. The possibility that this discovery was unrelated to the disappearance of Iris and Quinn loomed, a prospect that would only deepen the mystery of their fate. While the forensic anthropologists worked on the identification, the focus of the investigation shifted to the weapon. The arrowhead embedded in the spine was highly unusual, a bizarre anomaly in a contemporary crime. It was sent to experts in metallurgy and archaeology for analysis. The results were startling. The arrowhead found was no modern hunting broadhead. Heavily corroded and archaic in design, experts identified it as a replica, the kind often made by hobbyists or historical reenactors. Though crudely crafted, it was lethally effective. This discovery completely changed the investigation. It suggested a killer who used primitive weapons, someone with specialized skills and a disturbing fascination with the past. The weapon's use felt personal and profoundly violent, raising questions about the killer's motive. Why use an arrow when a gun would be so much more efficient? The case stalled, caught between the difficulty of identifying the remains and the strangeness of the weapon. Detective Reese Garrison, the lead investigator, realized they needed more evidence from the burial site. He ordered a meticulous secondary grid search, expanding the search perimeter further into the dense woods. It was during this secondary search that they found their much-needed break. Embedded in the complex root system of a nearby tree, hidden beneath years of accumulated forest debris, investigators found fragments of a human skull and a partial jawbone. These new findings were rushed to the forensic lab. The presence of the jawbone and teeth offered a new path for identification: dental records. A forensic odontologist began the painstaking process of reconstructing the partial jawbone and comparing the teeth to the dental records of known missing persons. After days of intensive analysis, a positive match was made. The remains belonged to Quinn Walsh. The identification hit the investigative team and the families with the force of a physical blow. After 5 years of uncertainty, they finally had an answer regarding Quinn's fate. But it was a horrific answer. She hadn't died in an accident or succumbed to the elements. She had been murdered, shot in the back with an archaic weapon, and buried in a shallow grave deep in the wilderness. Lena Petrovich and the Walsh family were devastated. The confirmation of Quinn's death extinguished the last flicker of hope that she might somehow still be alive. The grief was overwhelming, compounded by the violence of her death. But the discovery also raised a new, agonizing question. Where was Iris Jansen? The excavation of the burial site had been exhaustive. The forensic experts were confident that the remains belonged to a single individual. There was absolutely no trace of Iris at the scene, no clothing, personal items, or DNA evidence. The absence of Iris's remains presented a terrifying dichotomy. Had she met the same fate as Quinn, her body buried elsewhere in the vast wilderness? Or impossibly, had she somehow survived the attack, witnessed her best friend's murder, and managed to escape? The investigation now faced a dual challenge: identifying the killer responsible for Quinn's murder and locating Iris. The discovery of Quinn's remains had closed one chapter of the mystery, but it had opened another. The archaic arrowhead, once a bizarre anomaly, now became the key to unlocking the identity of a killer who had evaded justice for 5 years. The investigation turned toward finding individuals known to possess and use such unusual weapons, a search that would lead them into the dark heart of the Colorado wilderness and the fringes of society. The identification of Quinn Walsh and the nature of her death galvanized the investigation. It was now officially a homicide. Detective Garrison, a seasoned investigator known for solving cold cases, took the lead. His focus was immediately drawn to the weapon. The frontier-style arrowhead was the most distinctive piece of evidence they had, and Garrison believed it was the key to identifying the killer. The investigation shifted towards identifying individuals or groups known to use such primitive weapons in the rugged Colorado mountains. This search led them to a specific subculture: survivalists, preppers, and those who practice primitive skills. Garrison's team began researching local groups known for their self-sufficiency and distrust of the government. Their attention soon focused on a particular community, a reclusive, anti-government survivalist group living on an isolated compound deep in the region. This group was known for practicing traditional hunting techniques, including foraging and using handmade weapons. They were notoriously hostile toward outsiders and had a history of conflicts with local law enforcement and park authorities. The group became the primary focus of the investigation. The theory was plausible. Perhaps Quinn and Iris had stumbled upon the group's territory, or maybe they had encountered members of the group while hiking, leading to a confrontation that turned violent. Garrison began digging into the group's history, looking for any connection to the area where Quinn's remains were found. He discovered that the group had been the subject of several investigations over the years, mostly related to illegal poaching and unauthorized use of public lands. One incident in particular caught his attention. In 2010, years before the disappearance, Park Service authorities and fish and wildlife officers had raided the group's compound regarding allegations of illegal poaching of protected species. The raid had been contentious, resulting in several arrests and the confiscation of numerous weapons. As Garrison reviewed the records of the 2010 raid, he focused on the inventory of confiscated items. The list included firearms, but also a significant number of handmade bows and arrows, described in the report as primitive and frontier style. The connection was electrifying. The murder weapon matched the description of the weapons confiscated from the group. Suspicion immediately fell on the members of the group, known for their expertise in primitive archery. One individual, in particular, emerged as a prime suspect, Orson Holloway. Holloway was a senior member of the group, in his late 60s, known for his virulent anti-government rhetoric and hostility towards authorities. He was an expert tracker and hunter, and crucially, Garrison discovered that Holloway held a hunting permit, since expired, for the specific area where Quinn's remains were discovered. The circumstantial evidence against Holloway was compelling. He had the means and the opportunity. The investigation focused on building a case against him. In the spring of 2018, armed with a search warrant, authorities raided the survivalist compound. The operation was high risk, given the group's known hostility and their access to weapons. Tactical teams moved in quickly, securing the compound and detaining the residents. The atmosphere was tense. The compound was a collection of crudely built cabins and workshops surrounded by dense woods. The residents were defiant and uncooperative, viewing the raid as another example of government overreach. During the meticulous search of the compound, investigators found exactly what they were looking for. In one of the workshops, they discovered forging equipment, tools for making arrowheads, and several completed arrows. These arrows were identical in style to the murder weapon found in Quinn's spine. The discovery seemed to confirm their suspicions. They had found the source of the weapon. Orson Holloway was arrested and brought in for questioning. The interrogation room was small and sterile, a stark contrast to the rugged environment he was accustomed to. Garrison led the interrogation, presenting the evidence methodically: the arrowhead, the matching arrows found on the compound, and Holloway's hunting permit for the area. Holloway was defiant, a large man, weathered by years of outdoor living, radiating hostility. He refused to answer questions, responding only with anti-government diatribes and accusations of persecution. Garrison pressed him, focusing on the arrows, demanding to know if Holloway recognized the murder weapon. Holloway finally broke his silence, but his response was not what Garrison expected. He didn't confess, he counterattacked. He vehemently denied any involvement in the disappearance or murder of the girls. He claimed the group was being framed, and then dropped a bombshell. Holloway insisted that the arrows found in Quinn's spine were not his. He claimed that during the 2010 raid, authorities had confiscated dozens of handmade bows and arrows, including the specific type of frontier-style arrowheads they were now accusing him of using. He accused the authorities of stealing the arrows from government custody and using them to frame him and his community. The claim was outlandish, but it introduced a disturbing ambiguity into the investigation. Holloway's alibi for August 2012 was difficult to verify given the isolated nature of the community and their refusal to cooperate with authorities. But the case against him remained circumstantial. They couldn't definitively prove that Holloway possessed the specific murder weapon in 2012. Garrison was frustrated. Holloway was a plausible suspect, but his claim about the confiscated arrows couldn't be ignored. If there was any truth to it, it meant the murder weapon might have come from an entirely different source. The investigation into Orson Holloway and the survivalist group stagnated. While Holloway remained the prime suspect, investigators could not definitively link him or anyone else in the group to Quinn Walsh's murder. The shadow of doubt cast by Holloway's aggressive claim about the confiscated arrows loomed large. Detective Garrison found himself in a difficult position. He couldn't dismiss Holloway's claim outright. If the murder weapon had indeed been confiscated by authorities in 2010 and subsequently gone missing, it opened up the possibility that someone else, someone with access to the evidence, might be involved. Garrison decided to thoroughly verify Holloway's claim. It was a tedious bureaucratic process, but necessary to ensure the integrity of the investigation. He ordered a full audit of the Park Service evidence lockup, where the items confiscated during the 2010 raid were originally stored. The evidence lockup was a secure facility governed by strict protocols for managing and tracking evidence. The audit involved reviewing years of logs, inventories, and chain of custody documents. It was a painstaking process requiring meticulous attention to detail. Garrison assigned a team of forensic accountants and internal affairs investigators to conduct the audit. They spent weeks combing through the records, cross-referencing the inventory from the 2010 raid with the current inventory of the evidence lockup. The records were messy and incomplete, reflecting years of bureaucratic inertia and inconsistent management. But as the auditors dug deeper, they began to uncover significant irregularities in the evidence logs related to the confiscated arrows. And then they found the discrepancy. The records confirmed that the confiscated arrows, dozens of them matching the description of the murder weapon, had indeed been stored in the evidence lockup after the 2010 raid. But they were no longer there. The auditors traced the chain of custody, looking for documentation explaining where the arrows had gone. They found what they were looking for in the logs from the summer of 2012. The records showed that the confiscated arrows were checked out of storage on July 15, 2012, just 4 weeks before Iris and Quinn disappeared. The discovery was electrifying. The timing was too precise to be a coincidence. The murder weapon had been in the custody of the authorities and had gone missing just weeks before the murder. Garrison reviewed the checkout log personally. His eyes scanned the details of the entry, looking for the reason the arrows had been removed from storage. The justification cited was innocuous. The materials were needed for an educational display on primitive hunting. This explanation seemed plausible, but the logs also showed that the items were never checked back in. They had simply vanished from the system. Garrison's focus shifted to the name on the checkout log. The person who had signed out the arrows was a Park Service officer. The name was Kendrick Dillard. The revelation hit Garrison like a thunderbolt. A park ranger, someone entrusted with protecting the park and its visitors. The implications were staggering. Garrison immediately ordered a background check on Kendrick Dillard. The results were unsettlingly normal. Dillard was still an active ranger, highly respected, with an immaculate service record spanning over 2 decades. He was known for his extensive knowledge of the park, his dedication to his job, and his quiet, professional demeanor. Garrison reviewed Dillard's personnel file, looking for any red flags, any disciplinary actions, or any indication of instability. There was nothing. Dillard was a model employee, but the background check also revealed a crucial detail. Kendrick Dillard had been involved in the initial 2012 search operation for the missing girls. He had been one of the first responders on the scene, involved in the search of the abandoned campsite and the subsequent massive search effort. The fact that Dillard had acquired the weapons shortly before the disappearance, and then participated in the search for the victims, immediately shifted the focus of the investigation. The possibility that a park ranger, someone who knew the wilderness intimately and had access to the confiscated weapons, was involved in the murder was a chilling prospect. Garrison knew they had to proceed with extreme caution. Accusing a respected park ranger of murder was a high-stakes move that required irrefutable evidence. The investigation entered a new, dangerous phase. The focus shifted from the fringes of society to the heart of the establishment. The realization that the killer might have been hiding in plain sight, embedded within the very organization tasked with protecting the park, cast a dark shadow over the entire investigation. Garrison knew that if Dillard was the killer, he was a predator who used his position and knowledge of the wilderness to hunt his victims. The investigation turned towards uncovering the secrets hidden behind the facade of a respected park ranger. The discovery of Kendrick Dillard's name on the evidence checkout log fundamentally altered the trajectory of the investigation. Detective Garrison understood the gravity of the situation. Dillard was a respected park ranger with intimate knowledge of the terrain and the inner workings of the Park Service. They needed to build a case against him meticulously. Authorities placed Dillard under discreet surveillance. The goal was to observe his behavior and gather evidence without alerting him to their suspicion. The surveillance operation was challenging, given Dillard's familiarity with the park and his training. The surveillance teams observed Dillard for weeks. His behavior appeared normal, adhering to his routine patrols and duties. But as the surveillance continued, they began to notice anomalies. Dillard was making long, seemingly unauthorized trips into extremely remote sections of the park during his patrols, areas far from any established trails or points of interest. He would disappear for hours at a time, his movements difficult to track in the dense wilderness. While the surveillance was ongoing, Garrison decided to review the old case files from the 2012 investigation, searching for any prior connection between Dillard and the victims. He focused on the days leading up to the disappearance, specifically the hike the girls took with Lena Petrovich 5 days before they vanished. Garrison remembered that the preparatory hike had started at the Park Visitor Center. He requested the security footage from the Visitor Center for that day, August 11, 2012. The footage was grainy and low resolution, typical of the technology at the time, but it was still viewable. Garrison spent hours reviewing the footage, watching the visitors come and go. He focused on the time when Lena, Iris, and Quinn were known to be at the center. And then he saw it. In the background of one shot, near the topographical map's display, he spotted a figure in a park ranger uniform. The figure was partially obscured, but the profile was recognizable. It was Kendrick Dillard. He was standing still, seemingly observing Iris and Lena as they reviewed the maps. He remained there for several minutes, his attention focused on them before moving out of the frame. The observation was subtle, but in the context of the investigation, it was deeply disturbing. Dillard's reaction confirmed their suspicions. They now had probable cause to execute a search warrant on his residence. Dillard lived in a secluded house on the edge of the park, a remote property surrounded by dense woods. The isolation of the location underscored the chilling possibility that he could have conducted his horrific activities without detection. Investigators executed an emergency search warrant on the property. Tactical teams moved in quickly, securing the house and the surrounding area. The search of the house revealed nothing incriminating. It was neat and organized, the home of a solitary man. But the search was far from over. The property included a detached workshop, a large, sturdy building used for storing equipment and tools. Investigators focused their attention on this structure. The workshop was cluttered but organized. But as the investigators meticulously searched the space, they noticed something unusual about the workbench. It was heavy and seemed fixed to the floor. They managed to move the workbench, revealing a concealed, reinforced cellar door hidden beneath it. The discovery sent a wave of adrenaline through the investigative team. The cellar door was locked, secured with a heavy-duty padlock. They broke the lock and opened the door, revealing a set of stairs leading down into darkness. The air that emanated from the cellar was cold and stale, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something indescribable but profoundly unsettling. The investigators descended the stairs, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. What they found was a scene straight out of a nightmare. The cellar was small, roughly 10 feet by 10 feet. It was soundproofed, the walls lined with thick insulation material. The space was dimly lit by a single bare light bulb. It showed clear evidence of long-term human habitation. There was a small cot in the corner, covered with soiled bedding. A bucket in the opposite corner served as a toilet. But it was the other details that revealed the true horror of the place. Heavy metal restraints were bolted to the walls and the floor. There were signs of a prolonged struggle, scratches on the walls and dark stains on the floor. The investigators collected samples of the stains, suspecting they were blood. The evidence suggested severe, prolonged abuse. The atmosphere in the cellar was oppressive, heavy with the weight of the suffering that had occurred there. The realization hit the investigators with devastating force. This was where he had kept her. The focus of the investigation shifted back to the surrounding property. If Dillard had held someone captive in the cellar, where were they now? Following tracks leading from the workshop into the deep woods behind the property, cadaver dogs were brought in to search the area. The dogs moved quickly, sniffing the ground intensely. After a short search, one of the dogs alerted near a shallow depression in the ground, whining and refusing to move. The investigators secured the area and began to excavate. The digging was slow and careful, the tension mounting with every shovel full of earth removed. They didn't have to dig deep. About 2 feet down, they uncovered human remains. The remains were quickly identified. They belonged to Iris Jansen. The discovery was heartbreaking. After 7 years, Iris had finally been found. But the circumstances of her discovery were horrific. The forensic analysis of Iris's remains revealed a truth far more devastating than anyone had imagined. Her death had occurred significantly later than Quinn's. The forensic pathologist estimated her time of death to be around late 2016 or early 2017. The timeline was agonizing. Iris had been held captive by Dillard for approximately 4 years after Quinn was murdered. The realization shattered the investigative team and the families. While the search had gone cold, while the world had moved on, Iris had been alive, suffering unimaginable horrors in that dark cellar. The knowledge that she could have been saved, that she had endured years of captivity, was a burden that would haunt everyone involved in the case. The wilderness had hidden a monster, a predator who used his uniform and his knowledge of the park to perpetrate a crime of unimaginable cruelty. The discovery of the hidden cellar and Iris Jansen's remains broke the case wide open. The evidence against Kendrick Dillard was overwhelming, painting a horrific picture of premeditated murder, kidnapping, and prolonged torture. Dillard was arrested and charged with the kidnapping and murders of both Quinn Walsh and Iris Jansen, along with a litany of charges related to the long-term abuse and captivity of Iris. With Dillard in custody, investigators were able to piece together the terrifying sequence of events that led to the tragedy. The theory they developed was chilling in its calculated cruelty. Investigators concluded that Dillard had first become aware of the girls during the preparatory hike they took with Lena Petrovich 5 days before their disappearance. The CCTV footage from the visitor center suggested he had observed them, perhaps becoming obsessed with them, and began planning his attack. He used his expert knowledge of the park to track them to their remote campsite. Authorities believe he ambushed them on the morning of Tuesday, August 14, 2012. The exact details of the attack remained unknown, but the evidence suggested that Quinn resisted and was killed immediately, shot in the back with the archaic arrow. Dillard then abducted Iris, forcing her to leave the campsite without any supplies, explaining the eerie stillness of the abandoned camp. He took her to his secluded residence and imprisoned her in the soundproofed cellar. The use of the arrows stolen from the evidence locker was a calculated move designed to misdirect any future investigation. Dillard knew about the survivalist group and their history of conflicts with authorities. He used the frontier-style arrowhead specifically to frame them, banking on the existing distrust between the group and law enforcement. He buried Quinn's body deep in the wilderness, miles away from the campsite, in an area he knew was rarely visited. For 4 years, Dillard held Iris captive, subjecting her to unimaginable abuse while continuing to work as a respected park ranger, hiding his monstrous secret in plain sight. The reasons for her eventual death remained unclear, whether he killed her intentionally or she succumbed to the prolonged abuse. Throughout the legal proceedings, Dillard remained silent. He refused to confess, never explaining his motives or offering any details about the attack or the years of Iris's captivity. He offered no apology, no remorse. Despite his silence, the evidence against him was insurmountable. The trial was a harrowing experience, forcing the families to confront the horrific details of the crime. In late 2019, Kendrick Dillard was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole. For Lena Petrovich, the resolution of the case brought no peace, only a profound sense of agonizing loss. The knowledge that her daughter had been alive for years while the search had gone cold, suffering in darkness just miles away, was a torment that would never fade. The case of the missing hikers, which began with an image of youthful joy and adventure, ended in a revelation of unimaginable horror, a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide beneath the surface of the most beautiful landscapes.